Hi, good morning. My name is Rachael Lammey. I'm a council member from we tend to refer to it as EASE, the European Association of Science Editors. And for my day job, I work for Crossref, who are a membership organisation for publishers. Today, for the session, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the EASE, of the association, to give a bit of an oversight of how the association came about. It's a professional organisation of science editors, founded in 1982 by the merger of two other organisations, European Life Science Editors Association and the European Association of Earth Science Editors. So that all came together. The organisations were actually founded before that, back in 1968, so there's still quite a long history. And it's come together sort of around publishing itself. So Editerra published the first issue of Earth Science Editing in 1975, which has evolved into what is now European Science Editing, which is the publication of EASE, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail later on. I want to talk a bit about governance, only because I think in the age whereby there are lots of for-profit organisations, not-for-profit, in the publishing industry, there's a lot of discussion about open access, open source, that kind of thing. And I think it's really important just to have a little bit of transparency around, the governance behind the organisation and how that's set up. So the association itself is governed by statutes and bylaws, and the aims are to promote improved communication in science, and to assist the efficient operation of publications in the science, and it does that in a number of ways. And again, another important thing, the organisation is not for profit. As I mentioned, I'm a member of the EASE Council, which gets elected every 3 years. And the council itself is quite a mix, both people in, I guess, different areas of the profession. So myself on the publisher side, people who obviously work as editors for different science publications, or people who work on sort of a consultancy basis in and around the industry, or editors themselves. What does the council do? Lots of different things. The main aims are trying to make sure that people are aware of what EASE is, what it does, how it can support them in their professional activities, and I think as well, liaising with other organisations in the industry. EASE isn't massive, so we can't do everything, so it's sort of looking at different partnerships and also how we can communicate what the association does via things like, obviously, social media, via the conference itself. And then there are other committees which sort of are offshoots of the council, so to run the conference, and then different sort of special interest committees, sometimes around like policies and guidelines, which is again a useful offshoot of what the association does. It's not just European. There's an international advisory board from people, from the list of people that you can see, from members in Asia, and in the US as well. So that aids a little bit with the collaboration that EASE is doing with other editing organisations and publishing organisations. To talk about those organisations, and they sort of benefit through things like cross-promotional activities. EASE ran a joint conference 2 years ago with the Society for Managing and Technical Editors, which are those people who are actively sort of working on the journal, processing manuscripts, running checks for originality, and doing editing work themselves. So So cross-promotional activities, conference attendance, speaking at other people's events. So you can see there's an obvious overlap with some of the organisations like ISMTE. What we're seeing in the industry as well is a lot of increased activity, both in terms of publishing activity, in terms of publications, in terms of research coming out of Asia. So as such, we've been working with people like the Council of Asian Science Editors and the Asian Council of Science Editors, which only confuses me slightly, but covering slightly different areas within Asia, and the Korean Council of Science Editors, who are very active in their role in both supporting the Council of Asian Science Editors, working with EASE, and trying to make sure that the publications from their country are recognised and complying with international standards. So yeah, there are members from every part of the world, Venezuela, China, Russia, and just to focus in on what EASE members are actually doing, it's quite a long list, but you do have editors, academics, translators, technical writers, proofreaders, production personnel, people from the publishers themselves who are trying to support their editors and maybe providing author services to the researchers who are coming to them, and also I think sort of scientific editing companies as well, who are working with researchers even before papers are actually submitted. Membership peaked in the 90s, reaching about 1,000, and it sort of sits steady at around 450 members. As always, every year there's a bit of a, some will go out, some will come back in, and that's for reasons such as people moving out of the industry, people retiring, and then tends to be offset by people coming in again. So the membership itself remains pretty steady, and there's also a sponsored membership scheme whereby existing members can sort of pay to supplement the membership of other people. Membership, it's not massively expensive. It sits around I think £85 for the year, and that means that you get discounts from things like the conference itself, and some other benefits, which again I'll talk about in a moment. Obviously, in terms of communication, we have a website at ease.org.uk, which contains lots of the information on the outreach activities, and also some of the publications that EASE produces. The mission itself is to improve the standard and quality of science editing by promoting the value of science editors and supporting professional development, research and collaboration. And that's done through training, publications, the conference, and I think sort of providing a forum whereby people can meet, talk to each other, and also exchange ideas and ask questions. I talked a little bit about the publication, the sort of headline one being European Science Editing, which is the journal of the organisation itself. But in terms of supporting editors, I'd like to talk more about the other resources that there are. So the toolkits for authors, guidelines for authors and translators, and we also have a statement on the inappropriate use of impact factors. So again, things that are affecting editors and researchers, but also things to help them kind of navigate the publication landscape. The nice thing about European science editing is that the content is made fully open access after 6 months. There's a really good cross section of articles on sort of current publication trends, on issues that journals have potentially had with, say, translation work, issues where they've had to unpick instances of suspected plagiarism or misconduct. So I from my own personal perspective, I always find it really interesting because it's trying to cover a cross-section of what's happening. It's indexed in Scopus, and they've just signed up to Crossref, which is who I work for, but in order to get digital object identifiers or DOIs for the publication, which again will help the content to be used and discovered as widely as possible. To jump on to the Science Editor's Handbook itself, this is a real sort of team effort to try to cover the kind of issues that the editors would face. The simplest even being how to run a journal itself. Again, I know that having sort of academic qualifications or being an expert in a specific subject doesn't necessarily tally with knowing how to run a journal itself. So the kind of issues that they might come across, the kind of things that you might want to think about whenever assigning reviewers to a paper, communicating with authors, and then down into, as I said, the trickier subjects like, as I said, dealing with potential plagiarism. It's written with international authors who've pooled their experience, and then into the writing itself. So authors and translators of scientific articles. One of the things that we touch on is the fact that there is obviously a bias within publications towards sort of English being the main language is communicated, that science is communicated in. And I think there are things like ethics, the importance of expressing things clearly and correctly, but not without taking away the meaning of the article itself and the author's voice. So again, quite a tricky one to navigate, and I think the best way to do that is by people sharing their knowledge and advice on how they've come to tackle that. There's also a toolkit for the authors themselves, and this is used for as a training guide as well for some of the training courses that EASE Council members and EASE members can run around the world. And again, the materials are freely available on the internet, so people can come and take them and use them as they need. So that's a really great resource. Even just down to, how do you plan a manuscript? What kind of problems do you focus in on? How do you structure that? With a lot of new researchers and a lot of researchers coming from Asia, the Middle East, who haven't traditionally tried to publish in maybe some of the Western journals that expect certain formatting standards, etc. Just to try to really get to the basics of this is what you need to pull together. This is how you need to communicate it, and this is how you need to cite the material. To talk about the toolkits for journal editors, there are lots of resources from publishers like Elsevier and the COPE guidelines. But what it does is it highlights some golden rules for journal editors themselves, and I think these are pretty good. So again, they might seem quite obvious and quite straightforward, but I think they're quite easy to not to ignore, but to sort of forget about whenever you get into the nitty-gritty of actually looking at papers or trying to sort of stem the flow of manuscripts that are coming through your journal. And I think as well, talking about how to work with your authors, and how to help them, quite frankly, because I think people can go down the road of maybe, perhaps punishing authors or not thinking about the author experience itself whenever they submit to a journal, both in terms of how quickly manuscripts are processed, how the reviewers' comments are pulled together and communicated to the author, and also how the author's helped if it's found that they've actually done something incorrect. I think, you know, the approach that we promote is education and help rather than sort of punitive measures, and I think those help to back that up. Benefits of EASE membership itself. I mentioned the journal and the handbook itself. We run conferences every 2 years. You can use the website to advertise your own stuff. One of the things that isn't on the slide is that EASE runs a discussion forum, so sort of like a listserv for members where people can jump on, ask questions, debate issues. And from my own perspective, I find that really, really useful. And even if it's not maybe an issue that I've come across myself, having people thresh out, you know, how to work with like ghost authorship, who to credit, like lay summaries to, things like that, is stuff that I can kind of file away for a later date. And all of the things that have been discussed in the forum are available in a portal of its own. So even if you lose the email, you haven't lost what was discussed. In terms of putting faces to the organisation. EASE tends to pick quite nice venues for conferences. We ran one in Croatia 2 years ago, and this is sort of the motley crew before the conference dinner itself. But just to mention the conferences, you don't need to be a member to attend them, but they're sociable. They're quite informal, but with lots of really valuable information being communicated, and normally in quite nice places. So thank you very much.